أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين. Sura Tawir. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إذا الشمس كورت وإذا النجوم انكدرت وإذا الجبال سيرت وإذا العشار أطلت وإذا الوحوش حشرت وإذا البحار سجرت وإذا النفوس زوجت وإذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت وإذا الصحف نشرت وإذا السماء كشطت وإذا الجحيم سعرت وإذا الجنة أزلفت علمت نفس ما أحضرت. When the sun is wound up, when the stars scatter, when the mountains are set moving, when the pregnant camels are neglected, when the wild beasts are mustered, when the seas are set afire, when the souls are assorted, when the girl buried alive will be asked for what sin she was killed, when the scrolls of the scriptures are unrolled, when the sky is stripped off, when hell is set ablaze, when paradise is brought near, then a soul shall know what it has readied for itself. Now these opening 14 verses are, of course, all one statement made about when the souls would know what they have prepared for themselves. And these are somehow divided into two parts. One set of verses allude to the signs which go before the day of judgment takes place, before the hour sets in. And the other sets, which is almost 6 and 6 verses, allude to the events which happen before the day of judgment comes, and the 6 are referring to events which happen on the day of judgment after these things would happen. And after all these, every soul shall know what it has prepared for itself. Now, the 6 verses which allude to events going just when the hour is to happen are when the sun is wound up or turns dark or falls into itself. Tawir, from which kowarat is taken, means when something somehow folds into itself and just gets wound up. And this, of course, for the sun would mean that it turns dark. It would lose its light and its radiant sort of lights which are coming to us. We can, of course, go into scientific theories about how this would happen for the sun, and this idea of takwir would somehow go very smoothly with some of the theories that the modern science puts forward about how the sun would eventually turns dark and loses its energy. But I don't think we need to do that, because, as we said, this event on the day of judgment comes as a sudden thing, and we shouldn't wait for the course of the takwir of the sun to go according to its own course and route. It comes all of a sudden. We don't know how it happens. It might be due to something completely outside the solar system, or it might be just due to the course of the movement of the sun and losing its energy. We don't know. So we just take this as a sign that when that day comes, when the day of judgment wants to arrive, one of the big signs that everyone can see, because sun is something that everyone can see, is that it would turn dark, it would lose its probably light and warmth and energy. This is one thing. And also the stars. وَإِذَا النُّجُومٌ كَدَرَتْ, when the stars scatter. Now, in kadarat could be from the root kadara, which means again turning dark, or from kedar, which means falling down. When the stars fall down, that which might be due to, again, the whole system of gravity in the universe would be destroyed, and the stars would just be shut off here and there, and we see that they are falling down. And of course we don't see that, because then everyone is dead on the earth, because the earth would undergo very dramatic changes, as well as it is mentioned in the next verse. So the first thing which was mentioned was sun, which is the most visible for everyone, and then the stars, which of course are less visible than sun, but something very dramatic would happen in the whole universe. And when the mountains are set moving, وَإِذَا الْجِبَالُ سُيِّرَتْ. Now, about these mountains set to be moving, there are two possibilities. Some people have related this to the verse which says that وَتَرَى الْجِبَالَ جَامِدَةً وَهِيَ تَمُرُّ مَرَّ السَّحَابِ صُنْعَ اللَّهِ الَّذِي أَتْقَنَ كُلَّ شَيْءٍ إِنَّهُ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَفْعَلُونَ. In Surah Naml, towards the end of Surah Naml, you look at the mountains, you think that they are standing still, but they are moving like clouds. This is the creation of Allah. To all probabilities, it is possible that this verse is alluding to what is happening now when we are living on the earth. We think that the mountains are, could be used metaphorically to allude to the earth itself. You look at the earth, you look at its mountains, you think that it's standing still, but it's moving like the clouds. The way the clouds are moving, the mountains are moving as well. This is how Allah has created it, which of course has created everything else. So that alludes to the fact that the earth is moving, it's not standing still. But here, when it talks about the moving of the mountains on that day, it is something which would happen. And that is, of course, not the mountains themselves with the earth would be moving, like what's happening now. It would be something, of course, very dramatic. The mountains, as it is mentioned in other verses of the Quran, they will be pounded, they will be like carded wool, they will be plucked out of their place, and then will be shot here and there. This is how they would be set on moving. And this would be due to, might be due to many different causes which are, of course, unknown to us. One is, for example, if the whole system of gravity in the solar system is disrupted, then certainly the mountains and the earth would not stay the way they are. The second is, again, to the loss of gravity of the sun. The molten material inside the earth would explode and would come out, and this would somehow make the mountains to be plucked out of their places and to be thrown here and there. Again, this is al-jibalu suyirat. Or, as we have in Surah Al-Haqqa, there is something else which is mentioned there, and that is فَإِذَا نُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ نَفْخَةٌ وَاحِدَةٌ. When one blowing of the trumpet takes place, وَحُمِلَتِ الْأَرْضُ وَالْجِبَالِ, and then the earth and the mountains will be carried, فَدُكَّتَا دَكَّةً وَاحِدَةً, and they will be pounded once. فَيَوْمَئِذٍ وَقَعَتِ الْوَاقِعَةُ. On that day, that waqa, that event would happen. Now, this would seem to me like a big meteor pounding and tracking the earth in a way that all the mountains would become like the carded wools. Everything which you would see on the earth as solid material, solid object, by that big collision, probably of a meteor, as we said, the stars would fall, the gravity would go, probably the atmosphere cannot hold the objects which are coming down towards the earth, and as it does now, and just throws them here and there. Then, of course, when that pounding comes, as we have in many verses, the earth will be pounded. This would not happen unless it is hit by something very heavy, in a way that the mountains will become like carded wool, and وَتَكُونُ الْجِبَالُ كَالْإِحْنِ الْمَنْفُوشِ, the mountains will become like carded wool. And this is the meaning of when they are set moving as dust, as something which are not, of course, mountains anymore. So these are different probabilities that we can say when the mountains are moving. Some exegetes have said that they are set moving because the molten material which is in the center of the earth, they would somehow come out due to loss of gravity, and in this way all the mountains will become volcanic. They just come out from everywhere, every mountain. They come out, and then the mountains will be set moving in a way that they come as molten material, molten rocks, which are somehow moved into the seas, and in this way even the oceans, the seas, will become like fire, will be set alight, as is mentioned in the coming verses. And also, when these things happen, of course, you would forget whatever you have in this life in terms of property, in terms of belongings, and of course one very, very precious thing which would never have been left to itself were ashar. Ashar is the plural of ushara, and ushara was a camel, a she camel, which was pregnant for 10 months, or even after that, even after giving birth, it was called ushara. And this was the most precious belonging for Bedouins. And therefore it is said on that day, of course, these things would be left alone, would be left to themselves. وَإِذَا الْعِشَارُ أُطِّلَتْ, when the pregnant camels are neglected. It means that when you forget whatever you have on this earth because of these things, if you could see it. And وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ, due to all these things, wuhush, of course, wild beasts which are never tamed or never get used to human beings. These will be mustered from here and there. Seeing these things, they come together, and husharat means that they forget to attack each other anymore. They come together, and out of the fear of that day, they will just stick together friendly to, of course, to be destroyed afterwards. This is one meaning of the verse, of course, and it is probably a better meaning than taking it as the rising of animals' souls, which, of course, that is proven in its regard, but in its place, but it wouldn't go with the order of these verses, because now this order is not talking about what happens after these events, after the day of judgment has been set up. It's in the order of events which go before the day of judgment is set up. However, about the resurrection of wuhush, of beasts, of wild animals, also, of course, there are different views. But some have taken this verse to be a very, very concrete proof that animals would be resurrected and would have a sort of judgment which is, of course, unknown to us, completely unknown to us. Their world are quite different. You never know how a mosquito is being is going to be resurrected and judged by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, we would want all of them to go to hell, but it is something which is quite unknown to human being. But from other verses, as I said, this verse wouldn't probably be a good verse to establish that fact. From other verses, we understand that yes, animals are not just created in vain, not created only for this world. They are just like us. They are some sort of creatures who are able to understand, who are susceptible to be judged, and would go to places that we don't know, which are completely unknown to us. I don't say hell or paradise because that is something that Allah explains for us, human beings. What is their destiny, we do not know. But what we know is that in Surah Al-An'am, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ, nothing that moves on the earth or moves inside the earth. وَلَا طَائِرٌ يَطِيرُ بِجَنَاحِهِ, and no bird which flies in the sky. إِلَّا أُمَمٌ أَمْثَالُكُمْ, they are just communities like you. ثُمَّ إِلَى مَا فَرَّطْنَا فِي الْكِتَابِ مِنْ شَيْءٍ ثُمَّ إِلَى رَبِّهِمْ يُحْشَرُونَ, we have not neglected anything in the book of creation. That means these animals are not going to be neglected. They are created, they have some sort of souls, and these souls are not going to be neglected. They will come to their final abode, final place. ثُمَّ إِلَى رَبِّهِمْ يُحْشَرُونَ, they will be, of course, resurrected towards their Lord. They will be collected towards their Lord, as everything will go towards their Lord. So this is a very clear evidence that animals also would have a sort of resurrection as we human beings have. Also, there are hints in the Quran about the intelligence of some of the animals, which, of course, is very amazing. As I said, this world is quite unknown to us, the world of animals. We usually think that they don't understand anything. They do everything instinctively as a drive of their instincts. And they make no judgments, no decisions. But apparently, even experience would tell us that this is not the case. This is a very simple-minded outlook that we have towards the animals. In the Quran, when, for example, about this hudhud, is it hupi or what? Hoopoe. Yeah, anyhow, I say hudhud. This about hudhud, which is mentioned in Surah Naml, of course you find that Sulaiman was very hard on him, even deciding to punish him or to execute him because of negligence of duty. وَحُشِرَ لِسُلَيْمَانَ جُنُودُهُ مِنَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ وَالطَّيْرِ فَهُمْ يُوزَعُونَ, as he had, of course, the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala given to him to have control over the jinn and human beings and over the birds. And when he wanted to, of course, move his army, he had all these mustered and he paraded them. And of course, this hudhud was the most important member of his army, because, as I said, hudhud can detect water under the ground from where it's flying. And it was very, very important for Sulaiman when he was moving his army to have this hudhud going in front to tell him where the water is, so that he moves his army in that direction, so that they would not die of thirst. And when, of course, his army were mobilized, then he was parading to see if everything is in place. فَقَالَ مَالِي لَا أَرَى الْهُدْهُدْ أَمْ كَانَ مِنَ الْغَائِبِينَ, where is the hudhud? do I not see him, or he is absent from my call? And of course, anyone, it was an army. Even for animals, it was an army, and just army discipline was very strict. Otherwise, Sulaiman could not make all those victories. So he said, لَأُعَذِّبَنَّهُ عَذَابًا شَدِيدًا أَوْ لَأَذْبَحَنَّهُ أَوْ لَيَأْتِيَنِّي بِسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ. So if he comes back, I either punish him very severely or execute him as negligence of duty in the army as a punishment for that, or he would bring me a very, very good excuse. أَوْ لَيَأْتِيَنِّي بِسُلْطَانٍ مُبِينٍ. Well, he came, or it came, I don't know whether we should say he came or it came. فَمَكَثَ غَيْرَ بَعِيدٍ. And of course came and stood just close to Sulaiman. فَقَالَ فَمَكَثَ غَيْرَ بَعِيدٍ فَقَالَ أَحَطْتُ بِمَا لَمْ تُحِطْ بِهِ وَجِئْتُكَ مِنْ سَبَأٍ بِنَبَأٍ يَقِينٍ. Well, he brought a very, very important information for Sulaiman, and that was about the Queen Sheba and his people and her people. Now, what was very, very important here, not only the sense of duty that this Hudhud should have felt towards Sulaiman, and not that, of course, free will, which would cause punishment and execution and all these things. His understanding of what we call worship, of what we call duty towards God, of what we call sense of spirituality, which of course we usually think are absent in animals. Now, the news that he brought was that, of course, أَنِّي رَأَيْتُ امْرَأَةً تَمْلِكُهُمْ. Well, he could discern that whether men should rule a city or women should rule a city in our human world. Of course, in animal world, we really don't know what goes on. But this Hudhud was very knowledgeable about our world. إِنِّي وَجَدْتُ امْرَأَةً تَمْلِكُهُمْ وَأُوتِيَتْ مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ وَلَهَا عَرْشٌ عَظِيمٌ وَجَدْتُهَا وَقَوْمَهَا يَسْجُدُونَ لِلشَّمْسِ مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ. I found her and her people prostrating before sun, not before Allah. وَزَيَّنَ لَهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ أَعْمَالَهُم. And shaitan is deceiving them. Now, these concepts are human concepts, isn't it? It's not a concept that an animal should know, usually. You might say this was a super animal, a super Hudhud, which was employed by Sulaiman, but there is no evidence of that. Sulaiman had many of such animals in his army. So we wouldn't say that this is just a sort of accidental event, and this was a very, very exceptional type of animal. And when we come to a man who is aware of the world of animals, like Sulaiman, then we discover that these different worlds of animals are very huge. It's not something that we simple-mindedly think that, well, these are neglectable type of creatures which are just created for, we don't know why, maybe God just felt that he wants to make a funny thing and he created it. Again, of course, Sulaiman was given, as his father, they were given this knowledge of speech of animals. They knew what animals talk to each other. Yeah, وَوَرِثَ سُلَيْمَانُ دَاوُودَ فَقَالَ عُلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ وَأُوتِينَا مِنْ كُلِّ شَيْءٍ. Allah has taught of the language of the birds. Now, it was not only birds, of course, because he could understand what the ants say. And as again we have in the same surah, in Surah Naml, which is of course after this very intelligent ant, which was talking to its members of its own species, that when Sulaiman was moving out, one of these Naml, حَتَّى إِذَا أَتَى عَلَى وَادِ النَّمْلِ, it came to a plain of land, to a desert in which myriads of ants were living. قَالَتْ نَمْلَةٌ, one small ant. And this shows that these were not special animals, they were just ordinary animals. قالت نملة يا أيها النمل ادخلوا مساكنكم لا يحطمنكم سليمان وجنوده وهم لا يشعرون. He said to its kind that, "Oh ants, go into your holes, go into your houses, so that Suleiman would not and crush you with his army," while they don't know. Of course, Suleiman smiled hearing that. I don't know how far this ant was. They were talking, of course, they don't have sounds. Suleiman could have detected it with an extraordinary type of ability or faculty that Allah had given him. But he heard it. He heard that this ant was talking to its kind and saying that, "Move to your holes so that Suleiman would not crush you." And then the verse says that فَتَبَسَّمَ ضَاحِكًا مِنْ قَوْلِهَا فَقَالَ رَبَّ أَوْزِعْنِي أَنْ أَشْكُرَ نِعْمَتَكَ. Suleiman smiled or even laughed at what this ant said, and then turned to his Lord and said, "My Lord, help me to give you thanks for whatever you have given me and my parents." Now, this smiling of Suleiman at what the ant said, and then the sense of gratitude that he had to God, could be explained in different ways. One of them is that, of course, even the ants under the earth, they know Suleiman, who Suleiman was, and they know that he is not an oppressor, that he is not going to crush these ants if he and his army know that they are there. So the ant said that وَهُمْ لَا يَشْعُرُونَ, while they don't know. Or there are other explanations for it, but still the knowledge of animals, of our world, is much more than our knowledge of their world. Their world is completely unknown to us, while our world, they know Suleiman, they know Queen Sheba, they know whether a male would rule a city or a female would rule a city, they know Shaitan, they know all these things, which are either we have to say that these are very, very exceptional stories mentioned in the Quran, or we have to say that these are allusions, just alluding to us, alluding to the fact that no, these animals are much more than what you think, are given much more knowledge, much more intelligence, much more wisdom sometimes than your wisdom. And therefore, when we come to this verse, well, this was a side story here. When we come to this verse, وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشَرَتْ, of course, we should not ignore the fact that, yes, there is this possibility, or is even necessary, that all these animals should be resurrected to their world. So this is another sign. وَإِذَا الْوُحُوشُ حُشِرَتْ وَإِذَا الْبِحَارُ سُجِّرَتْ, when the seas are set alight, are set afire. And this might, again, be due to all those molten material pouring into the sea, evaporating the whole water on the earth. And then, of course, you would see all these seas as just big pits of fire which are burning. وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ. Now, these 6 verses, as I said, were about the signs of that day, the signs which would happen. If you see them, you should know that that event is coming forth. Now, the other 6 verses which talk about what happens after, when these events take place, when this evolution between the 2 blowings of the trumpets, as we said before, takes place, then what will happen when this big day of resurrection comes forth? وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, when the souls are assorted, or when the souls are mated. زُوِّجَتْ. Now here it is the translation of qara'i is assorted, because they are assorted in different groups. And that means that everyone which belongs to a group is matched with that group, and therefore people are assorted in different groups. And this, of course, goes with the other verses which says that وَفُتِحَتِ السَّمَاء فَكَانَتْ أَبْوَابًا. The heavens will be doors that different people would go. And وَنُفِخَ فِي الصُّورِ, the trumpet is blown, and you will come in different groupings. And this verse would go with that, إِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ, that different souls which belong to different groups, different categories, they will be assorted and matched with each other. Now, there are other meanings for that, and that is what mainly Sunni exegetes have said, that is that, okay, the good souls will be zawwajat with hurul in, and the evil souls will be zawwajat, will be matched and mated with their shayateen, or the good souls will be matched with the bounties that Allah is going to give them in paradise, and evil souls will be matched with whatever is prepared for them in the hell. However, I think this meaning of assorting souls would be much better. That when that happens, the first thing is that you are categorized under different categories. You are classified. يَوْمَ يُنْفَخُ فِي الصُّورِ فَتَأْتُونَ أَفْوَاجًا. You will come in different groupings. The first thing that would happen is this assorting of the people, different groupings. يَوْمَئِذٍ يَتَّبِعُونَ الدَّاعِي. There is a da'i which summons every one of you to their own groups. Well, this is, of course, what happens afterwards. وَإِذَا النُّفُوسُ زُوِّجَتْ وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ بِأَيِّ ذَنْبٍ قُتِلَتْ. And when the girl buried alive will be asked for what sin she was killed. And this is, of course, when the questioning comes, when the wrongs are to be set right, when the oppressions are to be taken into account, and people are going to be taken accountable for all these things. And of course, since these are the verses which were revealed right at the beginning of the mission of the Prophet, at the beginning of Bi'tha, these very dramatic things which were sunnah and tradition in Arab world should have been brought into view. And that's because many people would have opposed the Prophet because of his opposition to these sort of traditions of the Arabs at the time before Islam. So the first thing that we would expect is brought up by the Prophet, peace be on him, or by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is, okay, you used to bury your girls alive, so these are going to be asked one day why they were buried alive. And this is mentioned as one of the most dramatic examples of oppression, of killing an innocent person. So it's mentioned here. Now, about this burying girls alive, of course, not all Arabs did that, but there were different tribes with different customs of it. Some of them, for example, they buried their girls right when they were born, right away when they were born. And it is said that in some tribes it was a custom that the woman who was giving birth was actually used to do that beside a hole which was digged in the ground. And if the baby was a girl, straight away they buried her there. And if it was a boy, of course, it was the day of joy and happiness. In some tribes, it was even more dramatic, because they said, okay, the baby, we keep it, and it's something which would bring happiness to our houses. When the girl reached the age of 5 or 6, then they used to kill her. And it was like that. It is written in the books of history that, for example, when the time came, the father told to the mother that, okay, put a good clothes on this girl, and they used perfume and all these things so that the girl becomes happy, and they took her out to where they had digged a well or something, and then they said to the girl to look inside, and when she looked inside, they just pushed her and buried her. And they used to bury her alive, and this was something which was something which somehow raises the question that why they used to do such a thing. I mean, they could have poisoned the girl to die and then bury her, but apparently this was something which they were reluctant to do, because they thought that, okay, this girl dying in front of our eyes is very sad. So they just buried her alive, and I mean something which is very shocking. There is someone called Ibn Asim, Qais ibn Asim, who came to the Prophet, and after he converted to Islam, he said, "O Prophet of God, I have buried 8 of my daughters alive with my own hands. What should I do now?" And the Prophet said, "Okay, for each girl you just free a slave, or give camels to the poor, or something like that, because now, of course, you have converted to Islam, and what can we do?" This was a custom of Jahiliyyah, a custom of people going before that. There are different views why they used to do it. It was sometimes in some tribes, even when they went poor, they killed their sons as well, as is mentioned in the Quran, that وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ. But I don't think this is something acceptable, as some exegetes have mentioned. They have mentioned this view that out of poverty they used to even bury their sons, because of this verse in Surah An-Nahl, وَلَا تَقْتُلُوا أَوْلَادَكُمْ خَشْيَةَ إِمْلَاقٍ نَحْنُ نَرْزُقُكُمْ وَإِيَّاكُمْ. Do not kill your children fearing poverty, that you might not be able to feed them. We feed you and them, so do not worry about it. They said, well, it says awlad, and that means they used to bury sons as well. But it's quite improbable, because son was a precious property. Apart from being a child, was a precious property as well, helping the family. And here when Allah says awlad, it means that there's no difference between a girl and a boy. Your girls are like your boys as well. So do not kill them. And the reason was that, okay, why should we feed our daughters? They are not any help to us. When it comes to the battle, they cannot fight. They cannot procure any provision for life. They are just a burden. This was one very, very important factor that they used to kill their daughters. And therefore, different expressions are mentioned in the Quran. For example, in Surah Zukhruf, it's mentioned that وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالَّذِي ضَرَبَ لِلرَّحْمَنِ مَثَلًا ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ. They said that God has daughters, but they hated daughters themselves. And therefore, this has been sometimes a point of argument in the Quran, that how come you say God has daughters and you hate daughters yourself? Is this justice that you do to God, for example, that you say he has daughters and you hate daughters yourself? أَلَكُمُ الذَّكَرُ وَلَهُ الْأُنْثَى in Surah Najm. تِلْكَ إِذًا قِسْمَةٌ ضِيزَى. This is a very unjust distribution that you make. You say you have daughters, we have sons, and when daughters come to you, when one of them is given the news of what he attributes to God, that God has daughters, their face turn black out of rage and disappointment. ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ أَوَمَنْ يُنَشَّأُ فِي الْحِلْيَةِ. What should we raise someone who's just busy with makeups and these things? وَهُوَ فِي الْخِصَامِ غَيْرُ مُبِينٍ. And they cannot fight. They cannot come to battles. They cannot protect us. Or in Surah Nahl, وَإِذَا بُشِّرَ أَحَدُهُمْ بِالْأُنْثَى ظَلَّ وَجْهُهُ مُسْوَدًّا وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ يَتَوَارَى مِنَ الْقَوْمِ مِنْ سُوءِ مَا بُشِّرَ بِهِ. Sometimes when they were given the news of a daughter, the fathers disappeared for a couple of weeks out of shame, that this is a shame. How can we carry this shame that God has given us a daughter, or our wives have brought us daughter. يَتَوَارَى مِنَ الْقَوْمِ مِنْ سُوءِ مَا بُشِّرَ بِهِ. And then in these couple of weeks, which shamefully he is hiding himself from the people, he thinks, أَيُمْسِكُهُ عَلَى هُونٍ أَمْ يَدُسُّهُ فِي التُّرَابِ أَلَا سَاءَ مَا يَحْكُمُونَ. Should he keep her with humiliation and disgrace, or it's better to bury her? So of course there was this sense of fatherhood, that this is my child, what should I do with my child? Should I keep her with disgrace, or should I bury her? And here of course this is the most dramatic type of criticism, rebuke to this custom. وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ سُئِلَتْ. When the girl buried alive will be asked for what sin she was killed. Okay, there are 4 other things which would happen after these signs appear and after the day of resurrection is set up. Inshallah, we leave that for next week. وَصَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَى مُحَمَّدٍ وَآلِهِ الطَّاهِرِينَ.
Thank you, Sheikh. Inshallah, we'll start with question and answers. Are there any questions?
Assalamu alaikum. Sheikh, this love between a parent and a child is one of the most natural things Allah has put in us. It's in our fitrah. Whether you're a Muslim or non-Muslim or Jahil or whoever, from whichever part of the world. What happened to these people that they lost it?
Yeah, you see, sometimes customs are so forceful that it would eclipse human nature. And this we can see in many other different occasions as well. This is not the only occasion. There are other occasions that customs would really are so powerful that would change our fitrah. And of course, this sense of fatherhood, this sense of attachment to a child was not something that they didn't have. And that's why the Quran says this father disappears for a couple of weeks, for a while. يَتَوَارَى مِنَ الْقَوْمِ. And then thinks with himself, oh, this is a disgrace, this is a humiliation, what should I do with it? And in this way, of course, he would have convinced himself that let me bury her. It's better. Some people have said that it was again out of that sense of love between father and his child, but in a very awkward way, because they thought that these daughters, if we have a battle, they are going to be captured by the enemy, and they will be somehow their slave girls, and this would be humiliation, and therefore before that happens we bury them. But this is never mentioned in the Quran. Of course, this has been mentioned by historians in books of exegesis, but Quran never raises this reason. It's that this is a sign of humiliation, or there is no purpose raising a girl, raising a daughter, because she is just a consumer. And this would bring us poverty. This would bring us nothing that a boy could bring us, and therefore Quran mentions min imlaqan or khashyata imlaqan, out of fear of poverty you commit such a thing. So, well, I mean, this is something which has happened. We have to analyze it in these ways.
More of a comment rather than a question, but I'd like to hear what you think. The prophets and the Aimma came to this world to give a message, and if you were to say, and taking the example of Hudhud and those ants, that besides giving the messenger the power that Allah granted to Nabi Sulaiman, if you were to again create the environment also in a different manner and give power to the animals, then I don't see what is a message for us. In other words, if Allah brings the messenger and creates an environment for the messenger which is different from the norm, then to us, the rest of the normal people, how does that message fit in? What I'm really trying to say, that I think we accept that Nabi Sulaiman had the power that Allah granted him. But everything else, from Hudhud's ability to comprehend or appreciate shaitan, and the ants' ability to foresee Nabi Sulaiman's army approaching and communicating, has to be normal, has to be in the normal domain of the systems. Otherwise, I think everything sounds too artificial for us to take a message. And if we agree on that, then and extrapolate that to the whole animal kingdom, and even today, it's just amazing, isn't it? That for animals to be able to comprehend shaitan, animals to be able to foresee whatever their senses are, an army approaching, an ant. Whilst I appreciate that Sulaiman was able to hear the ant because Allah had given him the power, but the ant to be able to appreciate Sulaiman approaching, fantastic. And then the ant to be able to communicate with millions without emailing, that is just incredible.
Yeah. How do you know it was without emailing?
Well, whatever the method is,
Yeah.
there is a method. So even today, if you say that the animal kingdom, there is this method of communication quickly across the millions, that's just...
Well, I think certainly this is not going to give us a message that we have to be like Sulaiman, or we have to try to somehow invent something to be given those powers, but it gives us a message of knowing our place, to be more humble than we are towards everything. We think that we are the kings of this world. All other animals are just useless, and they are created probably out of negligence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And therefore, they are not counted at all. The message which these would give us is that there are things in this world going on, which of course you are not meant to know, but just realize that there are many, many different things in this world that you are completely ignorant of. And don't think that you are the only ones with comprehension, with knowledge, with intelligence. No, everything in this world is invested with intelligence. And this is just an example of it, which comes to the first surface when a man like Sulaiman is given that power, and then would somehow unravel reveals those magnificent things of nature to us.
Are there any questions on the ladies' side? Zahra.
About the Zuwijat you mentioned, does anybody actually mention about the Sa'iq? Could it be that this is Zuwijat with the Sa'iq, because everyone goes with the Sa'iq on the Day of Judgment?
With the Sa'iq, no one has mentioned that. وَجَاءَتْ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَعَهَا سَائِقٌ وَشَهِيدٌ. But because that Sa'iq and Shaheed, the angel which somehow takes the person, and the Shaheed which brings his files, so to speak, are not going to be with them forever. They just bring them to the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then, of course, they will be matched with the shayateen if they are criminals. And that is something which is mentioned, because then they are going to be with each other forever, as long as we can imagine. As the verses in Surah Qaf mentions, وَجَاءَتْ كُلُّ نَفْسٍ مَعَهَا سَائِقٌ وَشَهِيدٌ لَقَدْ كُنْتَ فِي غَفْلَةٍ مِّنْ هَذَا فَكَشَفْنَا عَنْكَ غِطَاءَكَ فَبَصَرُكَ الْيَوْمَ حَدِيدٌ وَقَالَ قَرِينُهُ. This Sa'iq, which is not, this Shaheed, it's not Sa'iq. Sa'iq just brings them. It's just like an officer. This Shaheed قال قرينه ربنا قال قرينه هذا ما لدي عتيد. This is what I have with me as his file, as his actions. And then the man with the shaitan, as is mentioned again in Surah Qaf, the man with the shaitan are sent together to hell to be matched with each other. And that's why the shaitan is mentioned as a match rather than the Sa'iq.
Any questions on the ladies' side? Hayden.
Sheikh. Just a little bit of comment, for our honorable friend in here was to ask about the question of the animals. Animals have got to know what happened in our world. It's a must for them, because the Imam is Imam for us and for them. And that's why in the days of Imam Ali alayhi salam, a lot of the jinn and a lot of the animals used to come and consult him and ask him to be a judge in a lot of things. However, this is my question is, when you come to the Quran, it's getting me confused, sort of on a personal level. When you look in the Quran, it says, طَاهَ مَا أَنزَلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ لِتَشْقَى. Then it says, إِنَّهُ لَقُرْآنٌ سُيِّرَتْ بِهِ الجِّبَالُ فِيهِ تِبْيَانٌ لِكُلِّ شَيْءٍ فِيهِ شِفَاءٌ فِيهِ all these things. Where are we going wrong with the Quran? The people in the Jahiliyyah in the day of the Prophet, they used to tell their people, don't listen to the Quran because it's going to change you. So what we going wrong that this Quran is not having effect on us? Yet on the day of Jahiliyyah, they didn't even have the complete Quran. They did not have the Imams. They did not have all these people with them. Yet the Quran has no effect on us. We cannot do nothing with it. Yet on the days which have bits of the Quran, they can open cities, they can do all these things. So is there something wrong with us? Or have we lost the knowledge? They had more knowledge than us. Because they talk, in the Surah, it talks about a lot of magnificent things which are, to us, as a shock. So how could they comprehend it on their days where they did not have that knowledge? We talk about all the stars, the end of the time. So is there something we going wrong? Or is there something we losing? Or is the Quran becoming more difficult? Or so where are we losing our touch with the Quran? Because before, sort of when you read the Quran, they used to say they melt down in tears, they could not hold it, and they react with it straight away. But it's the same Quran. It was for them as it is for us. So is there something we're doing wrong? We're doing sort of more things than they did.
Well, we can't say Quran has no effect or no influence on us at all. I mean, certainly, why do you pray? It's the influence of the Quran, isn't it? Or why do you try to get closer to your Lord? Why do you fear the day of judgment? I mean, all these are influences of this message on us. We just have to talk about the degrees of this influence. We might say, okay, the influence is weakened or is stronger in some people, weaker in some other people. And even when Quran talks about some of the people who, when they hear these verses, they cry, tears come to their eyes, they fall prostrating for Allah, it doesn't somehow mention it regarding everyone, every individual at the time of the Prophet. It was only very, very elite members of Prophet's companions, peace be on him, which had this attitude. It was not all of them. And therefore, I don't think the Quran has lost its influence. Yes, you might say that, okay, we have lost that glory that we had in the past as Muslims. But I don't think that glory is something which we have to somehow feel strongly that we are missing it. We know that that glory at times went with lots of oppressions, lots of wrongdoings on part of Muslims. We know when the glory was spreading at the time of Banu Umayyah and Banu Abbas, there were lots of oppressions and wrongs committed by Muslim caliphs and later on by Muslim kings. I don't think we have to judge ourselves with that glory or with losing that glory. We have to judge ourselves with the attitude of Muslims in the world, whether they are more committed or less committed. Nowadays, of course, we see that Muslims are becoming more and more committed to Islam, more and more committed to the values of Islam, although we are in a sort of confusing era. We don't know what these values are, we don't know how to implement it. But there are ups and downs, always there has been. And therefore, probably we shouldn't, it shouldn't be right to say that Quran has lost its influence. It's something that differs in different people. And sometimes you might know any individuals, we are knows that in some individuals, this message has such an effect that has completely changed their life, completely made them submitted to the Lord. But this is not something that you can see with your eyes. What we can see with our eyes is only, for example, the outside glory, which sometimes we had and now we have lost. Always this Quran, this message, has its influence and value. Of course, sometimes it's visible, sometimes it's not visible. This is my view.
Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh. Something just to add to what the brother has said. Well, as you say, perhaps to say that about the influence of the Holy Quran in the world today, generally speaking, I think the whole of humanity is moving towards a very materialistic attitude. Therefore, you see that there is no religious fervor in the followers of any world religions. But compared to that, the Quran has, compared to all the three Abrahamic faiths, it's only the Quran that has held its sway over the followers. And we see at the present time that other people from other faiths are coming into Islam as they haven't done for the past few centuries. So, alhamdulillah, the Quran has got great influence, but we only need to listen to its message and open our hearts to it, and then we can actually understand what it has for us.
Thank you.
Assalamu
Alaikum salam.
I was wondering, if all these fathers were killing all their daughters, how did society progress? As in, were there set quotas, or as in, how did it work?
How did the society progress?
As in, yeah, how did the next generation come about?
Well, of course, they didn't mind others having daughters. They liked it, and they, even especially in wars, they took captives of a huge number of girl captives. It was a humiliation for many people, and it was a custom of Arabs. They didn't mind to have an import of daughters from other societies for themselves. It was just for themselves that they regarded it as a humiliation, and it was not something which happened generally among the whole society, everyone doing it. There were a group of very zealous people who did this, and therefore, of course, there was always this reproduction of daughters coming. So the generations continued with those people who didn't have this zealous attitude towards girls and burying them.
Are there any more questions on the ladies' side? Muslim?
Thank you, Sheikh. Can you explain us how the event of the blowing of the trumpets twice, as we have explained that once when the trumpet is blown, all the life will cease to exist, and then the second trumpet there will be resurrection. How this event, that the whole universe will come to change, how does this fit in with the first blowing of the trumpet? Is there some connection?
Well, the first blowing of the trumpet is the start of this process of change and evolution, which is very dramatic, of course. At the beginning, it's very dramatic. It might, of course, somehow cools down a little bit when it goes forth. And then the second trumpet is mainly for the souls to come back to life, rather than to do anything with this process of change. The first trumpet is the beginning of this process of change, and then the second trumpet is when the change is almost complete and the souls should come back to life, and it is blown for that purpose.
So when this reformation of the universe is taking place, there will be people and animal alive, and they will be seized with this kind of...
No, with the first trumpet everyone would die. No.
Are there any more questions? Okay, I think we'll end there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Salawat.
Muslim.